Hello and good morning, everyone. My name is Saiful, your MC for today. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. For your information, we have a good crowd today of almost 200 participants, and we are joined by members of IFoA as well. I'd like to give a very warm welcome to all of you. If this is your first ASM webinar, I would like to inform you that our sessions have always been fun and lively. Yeah, because the crowd are always fun and lively as well. So I can assure you that this one will be similar if you really participate in the whole session. The topic for today is Malaysia Motor Claims Inflation Study. The IFoA GI Asia International Working Party is a forum for GI actuaries to discuss local and international issues affecting members in the region, as well as the opportunity to perform further research on special regional issues. They have recently carried out the project in collaboration with Insurance Services Malaysia, call it ISM, and initiated a study focusing on motor claims inflation in Malaysia. This webinar intends to introduce to ASM members and also the IFoA members who are joining today the preliminary plans for this study. The members of the IFoA GI Asia International Working Party will outline the objectives of the study, the key metrics, and the expected outcomes from the analysis. There will also be time set aside for polls and also Q&A. Make sure you participate in them. Yeah, during which the speakers hope to get some initial feedbacks from attendees working within the industry. On behalf of Actuarial Society of Malaysia, we are very privileged to have representatives from ISM and IFoA GI Asia International Working Party. First, we have Mahendran. Mahendran, can you just wave to everyone? Yeah, all right. Who is a well-known face in Malaysia in his role as the CEO of ISM since 2011, and is joined by Victor. Victor? All right, the head of business intelligence at ISM. Representing the IFoA Working Party, we have Rohan, Adam, and Charchit. Rohan, where are you? All right, great. Okay, Rohan is a senior manager in PwC's Actuarial Services practice in Hong Kong with around 12 years general insurance experience across consulting and industry. And second one is Adam. All right. He's also a GI actuary, moved to Singapore in September 2018, and currently works for Berkeley in a mixed pricing and reserving role, covering both direct insurance and reinsurance. And the last person we have today is Charchit.
Saiful, I think you went on mute, Saiful.
Oh, really sorry about that. Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. I have to start all over again. All right, okay. Hello and good morning, everyone.
Oh, no, Saiful, I think the only thing we didn't hear is my introduction. Rest everything is okay, yeah?
Oh, all right, okay.
Just my introduction part, yeah.
So I missed out which one again?
Just my introduction, which is fine. Just my introduction.
All right, okay, sorry about that. And lastly, Charchit, currently a principal consultant with NMJ Consulting in Malaysia. Okay, before we get into more excitement of listening to the presentation, let me remind you with some housekeeping matters. Number one, please mute yourself throughout the presentation. Okay, we don't want background noise. Number two, please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. You can just use the chat box or ask directly by turning on your microphone during the Q&A session. We'll plan to address all the questions at the end, and throughout the whole presentation itself, there will be poll questions. Please participate in that poll. Yeah. So now, without further ado, I'd like to invite Rohan. Rohan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Saiful. Thank you for that introduction, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be speaking to all of you today. This is my first ASM seminar, and I'm very excited to introduce this topic to you all. And as Saiful said, our key objective from today obviously is to present our ideas and the concepts that we're looking to investigate, but really importantly is to get your feedback, your suggestions for how we can really bring value to the market throughout this study. So I'll quickly go through the agenda for today and then I'll get straight into it. So we'll start with an introduction, which Saiful's already given us. I'll then cover briefly the what and the why, before we then go into kind of the how. So by how, I mean which data we're going to use, and also how, meaning how you're going to apply what we're talking about in your day-to-day. And then finally, we'll go on to our vision for this project in subsequent phases in the future, over the coming months and then coming years. So maybe if I'll go straight into kind of the what, what we're trying to do. But before I do that, I'm going to start by asking an exam question. I know we all love exams. So imagine this question that you're a new insurer and you're trying to do activity X, but you have no data. What do you do? So if I flick to the back of the examiner's report, the answer is use market benchmarks. Well, what if you don't have market benchmarks? What do you do then? Well, what we've done is we've asked the ASM to rally up the industry, to get you all in a room together and help us to create a benchmark, to help us to create some statistics and some information that actuaries can use in their day-to-day. And the topic that we've chosen for that exercise is to investigate motor inflation in the Malaysia market. At a really basic level, we want to investigate any historical trends using the factual data that exists, and see what insights that we can bring to the market that you can use in your day-to-day. So that's really the what. We're looking at motor inflation in the market, and a couple of really quick caveats. We will of course treat your data with confidentiality, and there's no part of this investigation that we think will relate to anything anti-competitive. We're looking at historical data, we're looking at claims, and that's really the focus of our analysis. So that's the what. What about the why? Why are we looking at motor, and why are we looking at the Malaysia market in particular? Let me start with an anecdote. I was talking to a colleague a few months ago, and they were trying to carry out a pricing exercise in the region, and they were really struggling to find appropriate information that was publicly available to support with this pricing exercise. They wanted to find some inflation information, and the data that was available wasn't on the right basis. It wasn't at the right level of granularity. So for example, a lot of publicly available information is on a financial year basis, but what someone was looking for was accident year basis to help them to on level to use some inflation information. So they brought this problem to us at the working party, and we discussed, how can we overcome this problem? And ultimately we decided, let's do some research, let's get some data, carry out some analysis, and let's create some inflation metrics that the market can use. And in doing so, we thought, well, which are the main lines of business that exist in any market? And obviously motor is one of the most important lines of business here in Malaysia and also in the region and globally. So we settled on motor quite quickly. Then when it came to, well, which market should we focus on? There were a few different considerations. We wanted a market that was quite mature, where a lot of data should exist. We wanted a market where something interesting is happening, and given de-tarification in the market, we thought, well, Malaysia is in a process of evolution. So let's see what insights we can garner from our analysis. And also what's really helpful is you have already provided ISM with a lot of really good data, really rich data. So one of the pain points of such analysis is getting that data, but we're already a few steps ahead at this point in time. So it seems like the stage is set to really be able to carry out some analysis and bring some insights into value to the market. Throughout this presentation, my colleagues will go into much more detail about specific data, specific application in your day-to-day, and where we see the project going in the future. And we will at times make reference to a UK study that's carried out. It's been carried out for many years, and it's a really successful study. So we see that as kind of a target state in a way, but something that we can leverage, improve upon, and localize for the Malaysia market. So that's a little bit of background for the what and the why we're doing. And maybe I'll turn it over to you, the audience, to ask you a question. Given that you've heard the background, is this actually something that you're going to be interested in? So we'll hand over for our first poll question.
Poll, and this poll should be appearing in your chat box for the attendees. So please keep an eye on the poll. So I'm launching it now. So if you could all please vote.
Yeah, 56 votes so far. 81. Okay, great.
Okay. So okay, I'll give it another 20 seconds. It's good to see consistency in the responses. We are glad we are. Okay, another 5 seconds and I can then close the poll. Okay, so Saiful, I guess everyone can see the poll results already, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's in the in the chat box, meeting chat.
Okay. Thank you everyone for those who voted. I'm going to close the poll now. As you can see that, you know, yeah, I'm doing my math. Almost 90% of you think that this motor inflation, the claims inflation for the motor insurance is important or very important to you, and which is very encouraging for starting the session. And we thought that should be the case, so it's good to get that confirmation. So yeah, back to you, Rohan or Adam.
Thank you. So that's the what and the why. Let's move on then to the how. And I described the brief anecdote that the publicly available information isn't really appropriate for this kind of study. And we did a quick comparison. So we looked at publicly available data from ISM. We looked at publicly available data from the regulators in Hong Kong and Singapore. And we've put on the screen here an extract of some of the key information that exists, and also kind of the target information that we really want for this kind of study. I'll go through each kind of line by line briefly. You know, I've already touched upon the financial year accident year difference. So the next line is kind of gross and net. What we see in terms of publicly available data is that we normally see it on a net basis, and that is obviously distorted based on each insurer's reinsurance arrangement. So our target state would really be, at least in the first instance, to analyze gross information. When we look at the premium data, actually we find we get a lot of net earned premium data, sometimes gross earned premium data. So that is useful, but in terms of exposure measure, it's not the only exposure measure we want to look at, and there are other exposure measures we prefer. And as you can see from the following row, consistently that data does not really exist in the publicly available data set. Similarly, for number of claims, we really don't have the level of detail in publicly available data to carry out an analysis where we conclude on an average cost, which obviously is fundamental for this kind of study. And the kind of overall then theme from this is that the granularity of data is just not there in the public domain to support this kind of analysis. But no one wants to hear only about problems. So how are we trying to overcome this problem? Well, we're trying to get more granular data. And so to take you in a bit more detail about the kind of data we are planning to use, I'm going to hand over now to Victor and Mahendran from ISM.
Hey, I think we have got a poll question coming up before that, and I'm going to launch it now. Sorry, one second. Okay, so it says poll 3, but it's actually poll 2, so apologies for that. So you should be able to see it in your chat box if you can't see it yet. We have some people who actually roll a dice to get the claims inflation. That's good. Actuaries should be doing probability, so that's nice. Okay, so 111 votes. Give it another 10 seconds. Okay. All right. Okay, so we've got 120 votes, and I'm going to close the poll now. All right. Wow, I think this is interesting. So, I mean, which is not completely surprising though, because there is not any market stats available on this information about the claims inflation. So, yeah, a majority of the participants are using the internal claims data to identify trends. And the next option, the next big option, is the mix of CPI and medical inflation, which I believe is an appropriate choice as well, because claims inflation is going to be influenced by CPI, and the bodily injury part is going to be impacted by the medical inflation. So okay, no, thank you for your votes. So I'm over to the presenters then. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, I'm Victor from ISM. So I will talk about our motor data collections and the use case of it. So for motor data, it's actually submitted through all ITOs in Malaysia by quarterly basis using our own motor specification format. So once the data is uploaded, it will go through data validations, data reconciliations, and finally ETL process before being used for reporting purpose. So below is just a point form. So the first one is currently the ASIS validations and relation checking against the motor data is 184, checking on it, and the motor data submitted has to be reconciled with the BNN financial figures. And we also do some cross-checking against policy data with claims data. Currently it's 97% of it. And the next, we also do map with our internal ABI listing to our existing motor data. ABI here is referring to automotive business intelligence, which are consist of make and model descriptions. And finally, we create some of the new dimension and measurement from the ETL process, such as earned exposures and earned premiums. Okay, the next one is what information is available through the ITOs is actually, as you can see, there's a few factors and measurements. and it's available on ISM KMS, and it's actually available to all ITOs. So for this analysis with IFoA, we use most of some of these measurement and also some of these factors for this claims inflation analysis as well. And all this is actually we splitting into MMIP and industry. And before wrapping up, the data being shared is actually on industry level and it's not by company level.
Okay, thank you, Victor. So, and we have our next poll coming up now. Which is around the state-wise inflation. So specific to Malaysia, we're thinking about would it help the ITOs if they had state-wise information on, information on how the claims inflation works? Okay. Okay, let's give it another 10 seconds. But it's quite encouraging to see that most people do think that they had a state-wise claims inflation. It would help them if they had this information. I mean, the two things which we have been discussing while we are voting is one of them is around the car registration postcode, for example, where the car is registered, and the second aspect around state-wise information could be where the actual accident happened. So there could be two dimensions to it. And it's good to see that it will be of help because that is something we have been thinking of exploring. Okay, so I'm going to close this poll. So thank you very much for this.
Yeah. Charchit, if I could just add on to,
sure,
to what
sure.
Victor has presented. I think what just to add on is that the data that we have is quite rich, which we have been collecting this data maybe for at least over 15 years. But I think when we go into this analysis, we are quite confident that the data that we have, at least for the last 10 years, should be available. It has gone through all the data management process in terms of validation, quality checks, and this is good data that we can make available for this committee to work on too. So while some of you might be aware that we do publish our motor rating model based on industry data, and there is some form of claims inflation that we factor in there. But maybe that is a little bit more a simplistic approach. And we hope that this study, that is going to be undertaken with all the data that's available, while it is going to be also shared across the board, I think it also add value to the rating model that we actually publish to the industry on that, right? And it can be used. As was mentioned earlier by Rohan, there's some interesting things happening in Malaysia in terms of the liberalization. And I think insurers want to get their pricing more accurate as the market opens up a little bit more. And every single information that becomes more accurate will add value to your pricing exercise, right? I think that's our aim here to enable the insurers and takaful operators in Malaysia to be able to carry out very, very good pricings here. And our role here is to ensure that data is made available in the right way, in the right format, and also the quality of data is there. So, in fact, we are quite happy to be involved in this project, and thanks to IFoA and ASM actually invite us to join this project. I think it's a really good opportunity, both for us, the industry, and everyone here, to see to get into a little bit more details of how this claims inflation is actually in Malaysia. And I think once this is done here, this can always be replicated, whether it's to other countries or to other lines of business. There's a lot of opportunity for us to look into that. Through this exercise, we may also be able to come up with different additional measurements into our data sets, right? Because we have the raw data, we're always looking at how we can add value, whether KM is our online business intelligence tool, or better known as the knowledge management system. You can see all the measures and the factors there. But if we could add on more measures or additional factors, that is going to be further fruitful or useful for all the users here. So in fact, if there are some things can come out from this, other than just the inflation study, if we can come out with some other things, we'll always bring it in and make it available for the industry. So yeah, I think with that, I also once again want to provide assurance to all those who are contributing data to us, that in this exercise, we will always definitely ensure that the data is aggregated. We will ensure that data is not disclosed at any company level, unless if there's a requirement. And in fact, what Victor has mentioned, we may split the data between MMIP. MMIP is our high risk pool, with and without. If there's a need for it, but other than that, definitely no individual company data will be provided for this exercise. Or even if in any way that information can be derived, you ensure that cannot be done. Okay, so with that, I hand over back to Charchit.
Yeah. Thank you, Mahendran. I think it is. Thank you for making those points, because I think while undertaking anything of this scale and this nature, I think it is important to communicate the message that the data sanctity and the non-disclosure agreements are going to be very, very strong around this whole exercise. And in any case, we are not going to be getting a data which is not anonymized in the first place. But despite that, there will be an NDA that we cannot be using this data for any commercial purposes whatsoever as the IFoA working committee. And I just want to add one more point to it, that you must be thinking that some of us are employed with different employers, in individual capacity. But whatever work we are going to be doing is, again, we are going to be bound by the IFoA NDA. So whatever data that is being shared between ISM and us, we will not be sharing those with our employers in turn. And this would be the intellectual property of IFoA. And so yeah, I just wanted to add another layer of confirmation around this, that there's a very, very strong emphasis on making sure that the sensitivity of the data is maintained in its pure format. Okay, so I think it's over to you now, Adam.
Thanks, Charchit. Okay, so morning, everyone. So yeah, I'm going to be talking a bit about how you guys might be able to apply the results of this study in your day-to-day work. So this has been touched on a bit already. In my couple of slides, I'm going to focus on reserving and pricing applications. But I guess the fundamental point is that there's really so many applications for market benchmarks, relating to claims inflation. And Rohan was talking about exam questions earlier. I think could easily be a 10-15 mark exam question, just asking about the different areas of actuarial work that claims inflation feeds into. So I'm just going to talk through a few of those areas in these slides. So the first point I've got on here is, specific to reserving, and it's around on-leveling your historic loss ratios when you're trying to inform your IELR selections for recent years. So, in your reserving exercise, to the extent that you make use of the Bonhoeffer-Ferguson method, you need to have a way of selecting initial expected loss ratios for your more recent years. So in order to do that, one of the tools will be looking at your historic loss ratios that you've selected in reserving, and then adjusting those loss ratios to take into account claims inflation as well as rate change, so that both your claims and your premium are on a basis, a current basis, essentially. So Clearly, you know, your own claims inflation, as you guys have mentioned, a lot of you are looking internally at your own data as well, but having a market benchmark can be useful as well, to give a bit more robustness and to give a separate view. And, you know, that ties in with the next point. In general, hopefully you are looking at your own inflation data already. So you might be looking at, you know, tracking your reported or settled frequency and your reported and settled average cost per claim already. But this will give you hopefully some comparison to what's going on in the rest of the market. And that might be quite useful and interesting to see, you know, where your own inflationary trends are either aligned or perhaps different from what's going on in the rest of the market. And often there are things that go on internally at the company level that will be specific to a company and won't be present in the rest of the market. So there might be changes in claims handling processes. You know, there might be changes in underwriting that might mean it's quite difficult for you to look at your own historic data and get a true view of what is the underlying inflation in the market. But by aggregating all of the, you know, the Malaysian market motor data together, we should be able to get some, you know, more robust and hopefully valuable information about what's going on, you know, with the true underlying inflationary trend. And then in particular, I think we hope that we will be able to highlight some specific areas that could lead to follow-up investigations. So I think, you know, as Victor and Mahendran shared, in their slides, there's a very good level of granularity present within the ISM data. So we can look into, you know, specific locations, state levels, seeing what's going on there. We can look at specific heads of damage. So, you know, we don't just have to be limited to, say, third party versus own damage. Within own damage, we can look at accidental damage, we can look at windscreen, we can look at theft, and that might show up some interesting specific trends for various heads of damage, let's say, that could be worth further investigation. You know, it might show, for example, that for own accidental damage claims, there's one rate of inflation, but that could be quite different to what's going on with third-party property damage, which could, you know, merit some follow-up as to why that variability might be there. So I think once we start looking at the data, hopefully there will be some specific areas which we'll get some useful learnings from. And then again, so going back to the, you know, the applications in your day-to-day work, I think when it comes to large losses in particular, it can be very difficult to work out what the actual inflationary trends are. So even if you're a large motor insurer within Malaysia, when we're looking at these, you know, very large value bodily injury claims, naturally you won't have that many of those claims within your data because they're low frequency events. So in order to get a robust view of what the underlying inflation is on those types of claims, you really need to have a lot of data. And by aggregating the data across the whole market, I think we can give some more confidence as to what sort of trend might be visible on large losses. That obviously can feed into reserving to the extent that you select a large loss load separately, you know, to maybe your attritional or your cat load in reserving. But it can also flow in then to things like reinsurance purchase. You know, if let's say you're on leveling your large losses for inflation, it can then help you to say, okay, well, this is what my historic large losses would be worth in today's money, and therefore it can help guide what attachment point you might want to select for an excess of loss treaty, as well as the limit. And it will also provide a guide as to what sort of price you should be paying for this. So it can definitely be helpful from that perspective. And also when it comes to, you know, if you guys have to parameterize internal capital models, the premium risk element often would be split up into attritional, large, and cat. And for your large loss, you know, often you might be fitting a distribution, maybe a Pareto distribution or something like that. But in order to get all your data on levels, you need some sort of inflation assumption for large losses. So yeah, there's just a kind of overview of some of the applications for reserving. Maybe moving to the next slide now, Charchit, please. So just kind of a different side of the same coin, I suppose, talking about pricing. Mahendran touched upon, obviously it's an interesting time in the Malaysian market at the moment as the de-tariffication process is ongoing. So, as this process takes place, I think the monitoring of claims inflation will become increasingly important as pricing moves away from a tariff basis, and the development of internal pricing models becomes more and more important. And in terms of building or refining pricing models, clearly your inflation factors are very important when on leveling your historic data to ensure that the rates you calculate to charge today or tomorrow are appropriate. So it's a key input into those models. And also something else, I guess, is in terms of business planning. Again, when you do your business plan, you will when determining what sort of rate changes you want to be getting, you will probably be looking at what do you think the rates of inflation are in the market. And if you have a good grasp on what inflation has been historically and perhaps what it will be going forward, that will help to guide your strategy and your approach to what sort of rate change you need to be achieving. So business planning is another area which does have actuarial involvement, but also obviously underwriters, etc. It's quite important to have a grasp of claims inflation for those purposes. And finally, on the reinsurance side, I suppose for reinsurance pricing actuaries, they will very rarely have enough data from individual underwriting submissions to form a view of claims inflation for particular cedants. That's not really the level of granularity that's generally provided. So to have a market view of what inflation is, for Malaysian motor, certainly be very helpful when they're assessing the submissions and essentially on leveling the data. And it also, if they do get some individual cedant data, whether that's in the submission itself or it's kind of some qualitative commentary from the cedants about what kind of inflationary trends they are seeing, it allows the reinsurers to compare those trends with what is going on in the market as a whole. But you need this market benchmark in order to provide that basis. So yeah, that's what we're trying to achieve. So hopefully that's a kind of whistle-stop tour of a number of the various applications of this work. And I think pass back to Charchit now for the next poll question.
Thank you, Adam. I think that was very, very useful. So let me launch this next poll question, which is related to the first poll question, but yeah, just a different way of looking at it. So you should be seeing it coming up very soon. Okay. Yes, I think the trend that is building up is there is a significant proportion of professionals who are using an implicit assumption rather than using an explicit assumption for claims inflation, which which is an interesting insight. Okay, we're giving it another 5-10 seconds. Some more votes to trickle in. Okay. Going to close the poll now. Thank you very much for those of you who voted. Yeah, I mean, this is what we are seeing on the screen is not completely expected, to be honest, in the sense that when we looked at the initial, the other polls which said that, how do you estimate the numbers? And if we are estimating the numbers for claims inflation, it is kind of, implied that you must be using it in some shape or form. But equally, it does look like that some of these numbers are being implicitly allowed for. Maybe companies are calculating it, but not explicitly allowing for it in the calculations, because they are using their own data to arrive at these numbers in the first place. So it is kind of, in sync with that. Okay, thank you very much. So I think we're moving to the last bit of this presentation, which is the target state. And if I may, I just wanted to quickly show you, before we move on to these slides, as to what the publicly available information that is provided by the IFoA, third party working party. So could one of you let me know if you can see my screen? One of the hosts, panelists.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the reason I'm bringing up this screen is for two reasons. One, to show you as to what this working party is, and two, to show you that this is something which is publicly available, and it is not something which is being paid for. And our intention is to try and kind of do something similar in Malaysia, and eventually, if we are a success and if we can get the right data in other countries, this could be extended. But yeah, we are very confident that for Malaysia, we should be in a good stead. So I'll just pause for a moment to let you read the objectives of the working party so that you know what the next few slides are going to be about. Okay, so as you can see, what the objective is, it is pretty straightforward, nothing too complex. They're looking at a few points, which is the third-party property damage, third-party bodily injury claims, and they are looking at two different levels within the third-party bodily injury claims, which is less than a certain threshold and greater than a certain threshold. Now, whether we will be doing the same thing in Malaysia, we'll just talk about it in a second. And then they have started, and this is something which has been ongoing since 2009, as Rohan mentioned, that this first started working in 2009 and presented their first annual results in 2010, and since then they have been publishing this on an annual basis in GIRO. So GIRO is like the annual conference for general insurance in the UK, and you can find all this information is readily available through the IFoA's website. And starting from 2018, they started to include the own damage experience. Initially, the objective of this exercise was just to do the third party, and they extended the scope of this to include the own damage experience as well. So that is eventually our target kind of state. And let me just show you what it looks like in terms of the actual presentation. So let me go back to the slides. So if you look at the right-hand side, the golden section, this is showing what the index looks like. So this is 2019 study, for example, published in 2020. And they're going to talk about what the market environment was in 2019. And they're breaking it into accidental damage, which is the same as OD, and then TPPD. And then the other two are the the third-party bodily injury, TPI. And they're splitting it into two categories because the idea is that the very high bodily injury claims can have a different level of inflation compared to the not so high bodily injury claims. And in the UK, some of the bodily injury claims could be running into multi-million pound claims because of the cost of care and the nursing care, which can be quite expensive. And the nature of litigation and legal challenges to those claims could be different in nature. The cost of hiring a lawyer to fight those claims, all those things can influence the inflation for the excess TPI claims separately to the cap TPI claims. And obviously, as you can understand, the excess TPI claims are going to have a higher influence on the reinsurance structure of the companies compared to the capped ones, depending upon how the reinsurance structures work. And then they talk a little bit about the 2020 market environment. So for example, let's say our objective is to try and do this study using the 2020 year-end data. We will be publishing the results hopefully towards the end of this year, and then we can talk about how the market looked like in 2021 to give you a flavor of what the trends look like, subject to the data that is available at ISM. And I understand, for example, hopefully Q1 and Q2 data might be available by the time we are conducting this study, subject to all the ongoing complexities in data submission and publication. And in terms of the actual outputs, you can see the graphs. So very simplistic graphs, nothing too complicated. Again, just showing how the frequency has been changing over time and how the average cost of the claims has been changing, and they're just showing some trends as to how things have been moving over time. And again, just to give you, this is for TPPD, for example, and they put the information in tabular format to see how the year-on-year change in the severity is, what the ultimate is. So the two objectives to this, there could be two aspects to this exercise. One is just showing you what 2020 and prior years look like. And when I say prior years, we are going to try to use at least the past 5 years of curated data from ISM, but Victor and Mahendran tell us that they have got actually 10 years or more of information, right? So we will see how like-for-like comparison and how much we can standardize the data across those 10 years. And if we are able to, then we should be able to expand the study. But the idea is to at least show you what the past 5 years trends are, and de-tarification will be one of those points. So we might see things happening. So this study is also doing an additional step, which is to project it into the future as to what the future might look like and coming up with an ultimate view of the thing. So 2020, claims might not be fully settled yet, so there could be still, information trickling in, which can further feed back into the inflationary trends for those years. So that's the other dimension, and we are still kind of contemplating as to how much we can do. The first year is going to be a bit of a hit and trial to understand what can be done reasonably. Our focus will be to whatever information, even if we are able to produce less information, it should be reliable and something which the industry can rely upon and adds value, rather than coming up with a set of numbers which might be actuarially or technically making sense, but are not of real use to the industry. So there's going to be a weight placed on both of these aspects as we move along, and of course, and I know how much data we can get our hands on, which I'm told, yeah, Mahendran has got very good data. And these are some of the other interesting statistics that come out of this study. And again, we're not committing that we are going to be trying to do everything, but this basically shows how the number of casualties have been moving in the UK and in Malaysia. As you all know, it has been a very big kind of pain point as to how to reduce the car accidents and the road accidents. This goes on to show that when the accidents most happen. So you can see this is the day of the week at the top across the columns, and then the hour of the day. And you can see that this is the morning rush hour and the evening rush hours. And I'm guessing people are more tired in the evening, so more accidents happen towards the evening time and less so in the morning time. But you can see how the whole 7x24, 24x7 grid to see how and when the claims happen and how the driving habits are. And again, as Mahendran alluded to this, that the core objective is to go with the claims inflation, but there will definitely be some kind of collateral that is going to come out of this exercise, and we will be able to share that information subject to the market sensitivity of what can be shared publicly and what cannot be shared publicly. So yeah, this is talking about what the target state is going to look like, and which is why I was showing you the information on the IFoA's website. So I would encourage you all after this session to go and actually explore and see what they are publishing. It is quite detailed. So without getting overwhelmed by the details, try to have an overview of what it is, and then yeah, of course you can find how it is used. So what they publish as the claims inflation is kind of used as a benchmark for a lot of users. So even the government would rely upon that information to come up with their policies. So in Malaysia, what I think Mahendran talked about MMIP, so that is one thing we could certainly be looking into splitting out. Then we could think about splitting out the flood data, because flood data can cause a claim surge temporarily, and we might want to look at it differently to the rest of the information. There has been a civil law reform, and quite a few studies, including ISM, have been publishing information. Again, when we look at the past 5 years of data, we might see a switch, or a slight, jump into in the numbers around claims inflation driven by the civil law reform. Although the current understanding is it should not be having a huge impact, but this is just an indicator of where things might go in the future and how things might proceed. So I think the market is now ripe for us to do something along these lines. And then, of course, we can do a comparison with the global frequency severity trends, how the claims inflation in Malaysia works. So medical inflation, for example, is very, very high in Malaysia, for instance, and how that actually feeds into the bodily injury claims. We would want to understand that link, and it might turn out there is not a real link, because this is how the nature of the market, and it can lead to better pricing for the insurance companies, because they might be having the fear of the unknown, that this is going to impact my bodily injury trend. But we can say, well, medical inflation has been 15% over the past 5 years, whereas claims inflation, motor claims inflation is like, I don't know, I'm just making up numbers here, but maybe 5%. So we don't really need to factor in too much into the pricing for the bodily injury, portion. Yep, and accident hotspots. So this is again, depending upon what information we get, we should be able to get state-wise information. I think even more granular, but we don't want to be too ambitious in our first endeavor. But we could be able to find what the accident hotspots are, depending upon the information we receive, and that could again, help in the underwriting side of things. So the usage could be, so many uses we cannot even think of right now. But we do feel that some of these areas are where we should be able to add value. And last but not the least, the COVID-19 impact. So last year has seen, like, should I say, bumper year for some of the motor insurance players, and but it could have equally made the services more expensive, for example, because the adjusters can't go out, and it could have. I do not know what the relation will be. I'm sure people here on the call are much more informed on this in terms of how it has actually impacted the expenses and the claims inflation. But there's no denying the fact that COVID-19 would be having an impact on how the inflation for motor insurance is going to be. So I guess that is all I was going to say. We're coming nicely close to an hour, and I'm going to pass on to Saiful after having the last poll question, and I hope everyone participates in the last poll question. We have got how many participants? Let me see. What about 172? Oh my God. Okay, so you have 172 participants. So let's see if we can get at least 160 responses to this. And this is an interesting one, which is going to be very insightful, I must say, once you see the results. Okay. Where is my last poll? Oh, there you go. So what do you think the current claims inflation in Malaysia is? Let's see what the market thinks. Okay. Very good. Close to 130. Let's make it 160. So I think there seems to be some kind of a consensus, but it's not a very straightforward consensus, I would say. So there are people in both the ranges, and yeah, I would love to meet people who think it's infinity. Let's have a chat, and yeah. Good. Okay. All right. Okay, so before I close the poll, I'll let you kind of do the poll, and you can. So Saiful, I guess the Q&A session is now on, so I'll pass it over to you. So thank you very much for listening to us, and I can see a raised hand as well for someone called NJ. So I'll let you handle that, Saiful. So thank you very much.